What is up, guys? Disciple of the Hado here, back again with something a little different from my usual countdowns this time around. Recently we've been getting a lot more info for an upcoming game that I've been looking forward to since it was first teased back in late 2013. And that's Pokken Tournament. And with this new info, I figured it was time to collect everything we've got so far and just go over it with you guys. So the first thing I want to talk about is the gameplay style and some of the features we've been able to pick out so far. It's funny, when I first saw this game in motion, outside of the initial trailer, I immediately thought, holy shit, dude, this is not the game I thought I was going to be getting. When I first heard that Namco was making a Pokemon fighting game, I, probably like a lot of other people, were thinking that basically we were going to be getting a Tekken game, just with Pokemon instead of Tekken characters. And that is clearly not the case here, because Pokken Tournament is in fact an arena fighter. It reminds me a lot of the Naruto Ultimate Ninja Storm games, and especially the Dissidia Final Fantasy games. I see a lot of Dissidia in this game. But I'm not complaining. I love me a good arena fighter every now and again, and I played the Dissidia games to death and back in the day. So the game uses a 6-button layout. You have a light attack, a heavy attack, a special Pokemon-specific attack, like special moves, jump button, an assist button, and a block button. And like in the Dissidia games, you can combine attacks with different directions on the D-pad. Yes, this game uses a D-pad, I'll get to that in a minute, to execute different moves. And through the footage we've seen so far, we've seen a few standard kind of fighting game-y mechanics. Like we've seen some wall splats, we've seen wall bounces, we've seen juggles, OTGs, counter hits, all that good stuff. This game also does have a meter system, which they refer to as the resonance gauge, and you gain meter by dealing damage and taking damage, basic stuff. And when it's full, your Pokemon can access basically a Hyper Mode, or a Mega Evolution if you're using a Pokemon that has one. And with that in mind, I'm fully convinced at this point that Mega Evolutions are purely a cosmetic change. Pokemon with Mega Forms don't seem to become any more or less powerful than those that just have a normal Mega Form, Hyper Mode. Maybe this could change later on, maybe there's some hidden secret to Mega Forms that we just haven't seen yet, but from what we've seen so far, Mega Evolution is an aesthetic change, nothing more. Anyway, so your Pokemon goes into Hyper Mode, and from there, your normal moves gain new properties and effects, and from what I've seen so far, the damage you can deal while in Hyper Mode is pretty high. If you take a look at the footage here, there's a moment in this match where Pikachu goes into Hyper Mode and with just a few attacks drops Lucario's health from nearly full to next to nothing in a matter of seconds. And that's kind of insane. Probably the most important aspect of Hyper Mode is that it gives you access to your Pokemon's super move, and these super moves definitely take a page out of Street Fighter IV's book, having both a full animation version and a quote-unquote non-animation version, where if you don't connect like the startup with your opponent correctly, like say if you try hitting someone out of the air with it. But other than that, there doesn't really seem to be that much else meter is used for. They haven't shown any advanced or EX style moves to spend meter on. Maybe that's just a thing with this current build of the game. I couldn't tell you right now. A more curious mechanic we've also had a glimpse of is a level-up system, which is tied to a grading system based on how you perform in a fight. This is obviously based on the level-up system in the original Pokemon games, where after a battle your Pokemon gains experience. And in Pokken, when your Pokemon does level up, you're given a grid that lets you build on one of 4 stats, which I'm going to assume at this point are attack, defense, HP, and speed. It's shown for the arcade release of the game that players can save their Pokemon stats in these little scannable cards, because Japan loves their cards, but personally, I'm kind of mixed on this idea. I'll get into that a little later, but at the very least, I will say it's an admirable system that relates back to the original Pokemon games. Now, before I move on, I wanted to talk about a couple of mechanics that we've seen maybe a few little hints of, but haven't really been fully explored yet. The first are these little floating spheres that show up throughout a match. These immediately make me think of the EX course from the Dissidia games, where you pick one up and it gives you a nice chunk of meter. And I'm wondering if that's a similar case with these spheres here. But in the footage we've seen so far, the players don't seem to pay much attention to them or make much of an effort to interact with them. Maybe they're tied to a mechanic that hasn't been fully implemented yet. We'll have to wait and see. And the second is the presence of a possible alpha counter system in the game. For those of you who don't know what that is, an alpha counter is basically where if your opponent is putting you under a lot of pressure, you can press a couple of buttons and spend some meter to counterattack and get them off you. Now, there's a couple of instances throughout the footage we've seen that leads me to believe this is in the game, but it's probably the most apparent in this match here. Lucario has Suicune backed against the wall, he's not letting up, and then all of a sudden Suicune is suddenly able to counterattack, and this attack appears to gain Hyper Mode-like properties. Now that's pretty cool. I'd actually be down if this game were to have some kind of counterattack mechanic, but something I noticed during this is that this counter appears to not cost any meter. And that would be kind of nuts if that was the way it's supposed to be. Most alpha counters in previous games cost anywhere from half a bar to even a full bar of meter, which is part of what keeps the system balanced. And since we haven't seen any other uses for meter yet in this game aside from hyper mode, having an alpha counter system that costs nothing would be considered a bit broken. But like I said, this is all speculation, none of this has been confirmed, so maybe we'll see what happens. Now, the next thing I wanted to discuss may seem a bit of an odd choice, but it's actually the arcade cabinet and controller itself. We first got a glimpse of the Pokken arcade cabinet during the stream. As you can probably see, this thing is weird looking. It definitely isn't designed like the standard arcade cabs that we're used to seeing with other games, and I think the main reason for that is the controller. Yes, Pokken Tournament is not actually played with a standard arcade stick setup, but rather with a more general controller, which we also got a good look at. This thing's very basic in layout. It definitely harkens back to the days of like the Super Nintendo with the D-pad, the 4 face buttons, the 2 shoulder buttons. But I noticed something kind of interesting in the way this thing is designed. If you take the overall design and size especially into account, you might notice that this thing is very similar in size to a Wii U gamepad. And I've kind of had this theory that this was done on purpose to gauge how comfortably the game can be played on a controller like the Wii U gamepad for when it eventually hits the Wii U at some point down the line. That's just my theory, though. I could be blowing steam, who knows. So now with that out of the way, let's talk about what you most likely came here for, and that's the playable characters we've seen so far. Now, before I talk about the characters themselves, I think it's worth mentioning that this game actually has a character class system. And we've seen three character classes so far. We've seen Standard, we've seen Power, and we've seen Technical. Unfortunately, we haven't seen that much diversity in character classes as of yet because of the 5 playable Pokemon there are, 3 of them are Standard, which is a little disappointing, but that'll definitely change as more characters are shown off. So let's start with the poster child of Pokken Tournament, Lucario, and I'm just going to say this right now, if this game has any kind of story element to it, Lucario is going to be the main protagonist, or at the very least his trainer is. Anyway, as you can probably guess, Lucario is a standard style character, so he's pretty balanced. I do think he has probably the coolest looking combos in the game right now so far. He's got a lot of very Kenpo and Bajin Quan-esque style moves that meld with his special moves like his Force Palm, his Bone Rush moves, and they look really freaking awesome. He also has his trademark Aura Sphere as a projectile, of course. Can't have Lucario without Aura Sphere. I think the one thing I'm not keenest on Lucario right now is his super, which is basically just this big Aura Sphere barrage. And it's not a bad super, mind you, I just think they could have done a little more with it. But even with that, I'm definitely going to be playing Lucario. He's one of my favorite Pokemon, I just can't help it. Next up is Machamp, and as you can probably guess, Machamp is the sole power character we've seen so far. He has no projectiles whatsoever, but he does have a number of moves that help him get in and do his damage. He has his lunging cross-chop attack, he has Zangief's double lariat, or maybe it's a quadruple lariat in this case. But the thing I find most curious about Machamp so far is that he seems to have a kind of self-induced buffing move. I'm assuming this is either Focus Energy or Bulk Up, but you can see that every so often in these matches, Machamp seems to give himself some kind of buff that is not related to his Hyper Mode. And I'm interested to see what exactly this does to him, but aside from that, Machamp honestly is not that high on my interest scale. I'm glad he's in the game, I think it makes just too much sense for him to be in, but in terms of playstyle, he's just not for me. Next on the list is Pikachu, and even now, I still find it kind of funny that they actually decided to make Pikachu playable in this game. I mean, I knew he was going to be in the game in some form, but playable was probably the furthest idea from my mind. That said, though, as of right now, Pikachu is probably the hypest character in the game right now. I'm not kidding. He's a standard style character just like Lucario, but I'd say that he probably has a lot more of a versatile moveset. Like, he's got his electric attacks like you'd expect, and seeing him fight hand-to-hand I think is really funny looking. But what makes it work is that a lot of Pikachu's basic moveset, like his light attacks and heavy attacks, are borrowed straight from Heihachi from the Tekken series. And it's so kind of stupidly awesome. Like, he has Heihachi's uppercuts, he's got the rising roundhouse kicks, he's even got one of Heihachi's wind poses. They've just gone out of their way to bridge the Pokemon and Tekken series through Pikachu. And I really like it. And on top of that, Pikachu's Super is probably the best one we've seen so far. This super kind of over-the-top Volt Tackle that ends with Pikachu forming this giant freaking lightning fist, which I swear to God is a reference to Kid Goku's Super Dragon Fist from the Dragon Ball Z Budokai games, which doesn't surprise me. Namco does own the video game rights to Dragon Ball, so there might be another reference in there. So yeah, Pikachu is looking surprisingly good so far. I'm definitely going to be giving him a shot. Maybe not a main, but one of those characters that you just have to at least try at least once. Third on the list is Gardevoir, who is our sole technical character in the roster so far, and based on her moveset, I'm gonna assume that technical is kind of interchangeable with zoning. because Gardevoir's playstyle is very zoning and keep-away centric. Even her basic attacks have a good amount of range to them. She honestly reminds me a lot of Glacius from Killer Instinct 3, with being able to combo her opponent from like across the screen. I will say, I do really like Gardevoir's super, where she sucks you into a black hole, which is a genius reference, by the way, and hits you with this massive, I'm gonna call it ultimate Moonblast attack. It's really cool looking. All in all, I do think Gardevoir is probably the most interesting looking character we've seen so far. I think her moveset fits her perfectly, and I'm just happy for her to be in the game. But at the same time, it's not that surprising. Gardevoir has always been a really popular Pokemon, I'm no exception. I do think it is a little curious that she was revealed before Gallade, who we all know is going to be in this game at some point, but what can you do? And the final character we've seen is Suicune. Yes, the first playable legendary Pokemon we have. And thankfully he doesn't appear to be any more powerful than any of the other characters, so I think we can relax about the whole kind of balancing controversy that comes with him. Suicune is the third standard style character, though I wouldn't complain if at some point down the line we saw him being rebranded as a technical character, because from what we've seen so far, yo dog, Suicune has some really effective looking keep away tools, but between like the Aurora Beams, the Water Pulses, the Hydro Pumps, and everything else, yeah, it looks like getting in on Suicune could potentially be kind of a bitch. But to be honest, the thing that sticks out for me most about Suicune is that he pretty much opens the door for more quadrupedal Pokemon in the future. I remember thinking that Namco would probably go digging up a ROM of that old My Little Pony fighting game to use as kind of a base to figure out how to integrate quadrupeds into the game, but after seeing the gameplay style of this game, I doubt they'd have had to have done that. But I do like how they're taking advantage of all of Suicune's features in this moveset. Like, they've got him using the big crest on his head, they've got him using his twin, ribbon tail thing. They've got it down. And I'm anxious to see how they're going to handle future quadrupedal Pokemon. Personally, I'm hoping at least one of the Swords of Justice makes it at some point. And the last thing I'll say about Suicune is that he has probably my favorite super that we've seen so far. He uses this massive freaking sheer cold attack that freezes the opponent into this big ice tower, and it even freezes over the screen. It's pretty freaking brutal, dude. It's not a one-hit KO in the original games. I don't think they could get away with that, but, I'm fine with that.
So those are the 5 playable Pokemon we've seen so far, but if you remember near the beginning of the video, I mentioned the fact that there are going to be assists in this game as well. And the way they're handled is a bit weird. Assist Pokemon are arranged into preset groups of 2 that you pick after you pick your character, and then you have to choose which one of those assists you actually call on before each match. Yeah, it's kind of weird. I do wonder why we can't just have both assists in one match, but whatever. So the 6 assist Pokemon we've seen so far are Lapras, Fennekin, Snivy, Emolga, Frogadier, and Eevee. And just like with the playable Pokemon, assists are also divided into 3 different types, which I'm going to refer to, until otherwise noted, as offensive, defensive, and support. Basically, offensive assists specifically target your opponent, defensive assists send out a move that covers your character, and support assists presumably cast various buffs on you. This is some heavy speculation, though, on my part, because, sadly, unlike with playable Pokemon, we haven't seen a whole lot of variations in assists, with the majority of them being offensive. We've only seen 1 defensive assist so far, which is Fennekin. We've only seen 1 support so far, which is Eevee. But at the end of the day, I am curious to see how assists are going to affect the game once it gets into non-developer hands. We didn't see anything super technical involving them in the footage we've seen, so I'll be interested to see how players work them into their game plan. I would also like to see the ability to maybe build your own custom assist set at some point, but that's just me. Finally, I do want to quickly go over the stages we've seen so far, and we've only seen 4 stages so far, so there's not much to get into. The first stage we saw, which was along with the initial reveal trailer, was Cromtown, and no, there's no relation to the Fire Emblem character, shut up. It's a pretty basic little stage, nothing too spectacular about it. There is a fair bit going on in the background, like there's a dude on his bike being chased by a Volcarona. Other than that, pretty basic stage, nothing particular wrong with it, gets the job done. The second stage we saw is the False Volcano, and I actually really like this stage. The stage actually reminds me a lot of the Cavern of Light and Darkness stage from Soul Calibur 5. I always really like that stage, especially the lighting of it. And the False Volcano stage to me here is basically just that, just with lava. It's pretty cool. The next stage is this rotating aquarium stage. We don't know the name of it yet, but that's okay, because this stage is definitely my favorite of the 4 so far. This stage actually reminds me a lot of the Aqua Elevator stage from X-Men Children of the Atom. But I like this one more because there's a lot more going on in it. Like, you can see a bunch of water Pokemon in the background. It looks really good. I freaking love this stage so far. And the last stage we've kind of seen so far is the Pokemon Stadium stage. Again, no name as of yet, and sadly there really isn't much I can say about it because we haven't even actually seen it in-game yet. We've only seen it in screenshots, so we're going to have to hold off on that for a later video. And the last thing I want to talk about here is a few of the things that I'm kind of iffy on as of right now. The first is this time freeze that happens during fights.
I haven't been able to pinpoint exactly what triggers it yet, but it seems like it may happen whenever a character lands a counter hit. You land the counter hit in the time, and the fight freezes for a second as the camera repositions into something more in your favor. And I'm not sure if I'm down with this. You might remember that something like this was implemented into the vanilla version of Street Fighter Cross Tekken, where you perform a tag chain combo and there would be a quick time freeze just before your character swapped. And it didn't go over very well in that game. A lot of people, myself included, felt that it made the matches seem to drag on a lot. And it was eventually removed when that game got its big 2013 patch. And I've kind of got the same concerns with it in this game as well. In fact, it might even be more noticeable this time around with Pokken being a much more fast-paced game. So, not a huge fan of it, hope they'll look into it. And the other feature I'm kind of on the fence about is, like I said earlier, is the level-up system. Now, like I said, I do like the idea of the level-up system. I like how it relates back to the level-up system in the main series Pokemon games, but it presents a potential problem I had with another arena fighting game, and that's Dissidia Final Fantasy. Like I said, I see a lot of Dissidia in Pokken, and unfortunately, that also includes some shared problems. If you remember, both Dissidia games also had a leveling system, and the problem with having a leveling system in a fighting game, I feel, is that it kind of screws with the competitive aspect of it. And you can probably work out what I'm getting at when I say that. Now, granted, this is also an inherent problem with the main series Pokemon games, but the difference there is that Pokemon is an RPG series, so grinding to gain experience is what you're basically conditioned to do, so you can compete with other players. I do hope that at the very least they give an option to play without the leveling buffs. I know the arcade cabs have the card system that you save your stats on, and I imagine you can just play without using the card data, but that shit doesn't fly here in the West. So I hope they give an option to work around so people can play without having to worry about what level each of their Pokemon is at. So that about wraps it up, guys. Pokken Tournament is overall looking super strong right now, and you better believe I'll be bringing you more info on the game as soon as we get it. I think the next time we're going to be getting more news on the game is in the middle of March, when there's apparently going to be a spread on the game in that month's issue of Famitsu Magazine. So keep an eye out, guys, and feel free to subscribe. Later!